Bonjour à tous, bienvenue au...
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the National Press Gallery.
This 4-minute presentation. We'll have 30 minutes question. All your names are already on my list, so I'll try to do a list where everyone can ask questions. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Thank you, Vincent. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm glad to see you all one last time in 2018 to take questions from you, but also to take a quick look back over the year that is coming to a close. As you know, the latest job numbers are excellent. In November, more than 94,000 jobs had been created in the country, and unemployment is at its lowest in 40 years. But that shouldn't surprise anyone. After all, over the past 3 years, we have made investments to help the middle class grow, innovate, and prosper.
Back at the third year of our mandate, it's fair to say that we were busy. We put a price on pollution, moved forward with a plan that will both protect our environment and help Canadians as we move to a clean economy. We negotiated a new NAFTA, preserving and modernizing trade with our North American partners. We introduced new competitiveness measures to attract investment to Canada and ensure that existing businesses are even better positioned to compete on the world stage. And we welcomed the single largest private sector investment in Canada's history, a $40 billion liquid natural gas project led by Shell, a project that will create 10,000 good jobs. But that's not all. Canada also held the G7 presidency in 2018. At our Leaders Summit in Charlevoix, we secured $3.8 billion in funding to support education for women and girls in crisis and conflict zones. And at the UN General Assembly, we welcomed additional contributions to education totaling more than $527 million. In partnership with Indigenous communities and investors, we got the rail line back up and running to the people of Churchill, Manitoba. Et cette année,
and this year, we kept an important 2015 promise by legalizing and strictly regulating cannabis. This long-awaited reform will allow us to better protect the health and safety of Canadians, ensure that cannabis is kept out of the hands of young people, and make sure that profits are kept out of the hands of criminals and organized crime. And finally, our government launched the very first Canadian poverty reduction strategy. This strategy is based on significant investments in housing, increasing the guaranteed income supplement for single seniors, the Canada Child Benefit, the Canada Workers Benefit, as well as investments in early care and learning for young children.
And just as our government has been busy this year, so too have all of you journalists. Thank you for your tireless work in 2018. As journalists, you're a big part of what makes Canada, Canada, a country that cherishes democracy and will forever defend a free press. I hope you all have a great holiday with friends and family, enjoying some well-deserved time off. There's no question that 2019 is going to be a big year for all of us. I'm happy to take your questions now.
OK, on a 30 minutes de questions.
We have 30 minutes for questions, and I apologize to those who won't have an opportunity. We'll start off.
Bray, a man who you know well, tweeted today that Canada needs to develop a robust, principled and effective response now as regards the detainees because, quote, this looks too much like a hostage-taking. What is your strategy? Is there a task force? Do you have an envoy? Are there talks about to start on this?
First of all, Canadians need to know that we will always, as a government, as a country, stand up for the interests of Canadians in difficulties abroad. Over the past 3 years, as a government that has taken consular cases extremely seriously, we've seen a number of successes, but we've also demonstrated that to the world that we take very, very seriously defending the rights of Canadians. We do so by applying a set of robust principles around rule of law, around our expectations that the rule of law will be followed around the world, and we demonstrate that that is at the heart of our approach. In the case of the current consular situations, we're going to continue to defend them, to stand up for them, to ask for more information on the charges being brought forward, or the reasons for detention, and we will continue to engage on a case-by-case basis in a thoughtful way on any consular cases that come up.
And secondly, if the Chinese apparently arresting Canadian citizens at will, if the Chinese threatening Canada with severe consequences, is there a point at which you might consider showing a few Canadian teeth just to kind of let the Chinese know that you aren't a pushover, or are you basically playing defensive on this file?
I think we have been consistent in our engagement with China. We have always looked for ways to benefit mutually in the creation of jobs and prosperity for our citizens by accessing the growing middle-class market in China for our producers, our agricultural and our tourism providers here in Canada. But we've also been unequivocal about standing up for human rights, the rule of law, and a predictable rules-based international order. We will continue to demonstrate that we take these principles and these values very seriously, and expect our trading partners and all countries around the world to be similarly committed to the rule of law.
La presse canadienne.
La presse canadienne. Good afternoon. There was a third person who was detained in China. Why is that case different from the first two? Well, first of all, I'd like to recall that we are going to take any consular incident very seriously. We are engaging so that we can learn more about what has just happened. However, I should remind you that there are tens of thousands of Canadians who live in China, travel in China, visit China every year, and there are also hundreds of consular cases that we need to keep an eye on. There are various interactions and situations that occur from time to time, and we are trying to find out more about this specific case. But as I said earlier, the first indications are that this is a very separate case compared to the two others that occurred earlier in the week. So you said there are consular cases that arise and that there are tens of thousands of Canadians who go there. Are you minimizing what has just happened? No, on the contrary, we're taking this very seriously. We take the safety of Canadians very seriously, and that is why Global Affairs is looking into what should be said to Canadians, how we can communicate with Canadians who are considering traveling abroad. We're always thinking about the safety of Canadians and how we can ensure that Canadians can live safely throughout the world.
Professor, can I just get you to repeat the answer to that first part in English? Why is this case of the third detained Canadian different from the previous two?
We have to remember there are tens of thousands of Canadians who live, travel, work in China in any given year. There are obviously regular situations where Canadians require consular assistance. We are, of course, taking any and every situation seriously, as we always do, but we are looking into the details on this most recent one that doesn't seem to fit the pattern set by the previous two, but we'll have more to say as we collect the facts on this issue.
So on the previous two, why don't you publicly demand the release of those detained Canadians when the American Secretary of State has already? And at what point will you consider reaching out, speaking to the Chinese president to try and lower the temperature?
One of the things that I've learned over these past 3 years of being engaged in consular cases and showing a modest amount of success in securing the return of Canadians in difficulty around the world is that every case is different. It requires a complex approach that is a combination of multiple different elements. When I was in opposition as a leader of the opposition, I remember standing in the House and challenging Mr. Harper to pick up the phone and get this Canadian released. I now understand that it's always a lot more complicated than that, and we have engaged in a very, very thoughtful way on trying to get the best outcome. And sometimes politicizing or amplifying the level of public discourse on this may be satisfying in the short term, but would not contribute to the outcome we all want, which is for Canadians to be safe and secure.
TVA.
TVA. Good afternoon. Will you repeat today what you said about François Legault and about what he said about dirty energy? And are you not worried about national unity? I think you know, like I do, that one of the things I love most about Canada is the diversity that we have throughout the country, whether that's geographic diversity, whether it's a difference in opinions, whether it's a difference in histories and culture, and that is what makes up our wealth. Now, my responsibility as a politician, and what I think is the responsibility of all politicians, is that we always find a way to bring people together, to find ways that will underscore what Canadians all know, and that is that Canadians want to be there for other Canadians. There's no one in this country who really would wish harm on another individual in another part of the country. And so I've learned over the years as a politician and as a prime minister that words that can be divisive should be avoided. That's a good thing. Now, I don't always manage to do that. No one's perfect. But most certainly, that's what I always try to do. I try to bring people together. And I think it's important for all politicians to do that. Yes, but François Legault's knuckles need to be wrapped because of what he's saying. His words are divisive. Well, I think that there's an opportunity to remind people that we should be there for each other, that we should come together. Albertans are going through some very difficult times. People in Oshawa are going through difficult times, in Sydney, Cape Breton. Throughout the country, there are places where people are experiencing uncertainty and difficult circumstances. And therefore, we have to think about how we can be there for each other. And that's what Canadians do for each other.
Prime Minister, at what point will you escalate your concerns about what's happening to Canadians in China to deal with the President of China yourself?
The decisions on the path taken on consular cases are always different in various situations. We have a broad array of tools at our disposal, some of which are more effective in certain situations than others. But I can assure you that our primary and single-minded focus is always what is in the best interest of Canadians, and particularly what is in the best interests of the Canadians being held or in particular difficulties. Political posturing or political statements aren't necessarily going to contribute. In some cases they might. In other cases they might actually hinder efforts to secure Canadians' release. We are going to take every situation carefully and seriously in how we move forward, and we'll continue to do that in a way that we've demonstrated in the past, being thoughtful and focused on the ultimate outcome, which is getting Canadians out of the difficulties in which they find themselves.
At what point do you have to change your government's now nearly month-old advisory and warn Canadians that there are different risks there now? Or do you think there aren't?
The determination on travel advisories is a decision made by officials at Global Affairs Canada who are constantly evaluating the situation facing Canadian travelers or residents in countries around the world. Those are ongoing reflections that will certainly be continuing.
La presse.
Oui, Monsieur Trudeau.
La presse. Good afternoon. The federal government owns the Trans Mountain Pipeline and has been the owner since August. When will expansion construction begin? Well, as you know, the Federal Court of Appeal came back with a ruling indicating to us how we need to proceed appropriately on this pipeline, and that includes further consultations with Indigenous communities. It includes more scientific rigor with respect to marine mammals, and we are following the recommendations of the Federal Court of Appeal. We will take the time that is required to do it properly. We do understand that Albertans could feel impatient because they truly need to access other markets for their oil. You know, for decades we've known that it is not good for our economy and not good for our producers to be captive to one market, only the American market, in other words. These days there is more uncertainty with respect to our neighbors to the south, so it is even more important to have access to those other markets. But it has to be done properly, and the proper way is to work in partnership with Indigenous communities. It's by thinking about environmental impacts. So are we talking about 2019, 20, 21? It will depend on the work that we are doing now in terms of following the ruling of the Federal Court of Appeal.
Minister, in 2016, after the deaths of John Ridsdale and Robert Hall, you vowed to bring those killers to justice, and there are new reports that one of the alleged executioners is active on Facebook. Their families tell us they feel abandoned by the government. Is Canada doing enough in those cases?
Obviously, I'm quite certain that the RCMP is going to be very interested in these new reports. As you know, the RCMP has opened an ongoing investigation into the deaths of the two Canadians, and that investigation is ongoing, and it is something we absolutely take very seriously.
Are you considering any policy changes around hostage takings?
I think we understand that when you have about 3 million Canadians living, working, traveling around the world at any given year, the protection of those people is of paramount importance to Canadians. And if there was a situation in which Canadians were beginning to be targeted because of a country's willingness to pay ransoms, all Canadians would be more vulnerable. We have a very firm policy of not paying ransom to terrorist organizations. That has the double effect of both keeping other Canadians safe or from being specific targets, but it also prevents money from flowing into the coffers of terrorists who then want to continue more crimes. That is a policy that Canada has taken, that many of our allies have taken, and indeed that I have brought up repeatedly at meetings like G7 meetings to highlight how important it is for all countries to take that sort of approach.
Radio-Canada.
I'd like to talk about China again in French. Now a third Canadian has been detained. So I would like to know if it's not time now to pick up the phone and call. And if not, then what steps does our government need to take now? Well, first of all, consular cases are always different. One approach that may work for one may not work for the other. And that is why, over the past 3 years, we have developed a more nuanced and complex approach to assist Canadians in difficulty. And we've had some success with that. Now, obviously, we are concerned about this third Canadian who has been detained, and we are seeking further details. We do feel that actually this third one does not resemble the first two cases, but we are following this, and when we know more, we'll let you know. When I was leader of the opposition, I remember that I told the Prime Minister to pick up the phone and demand that his counterpart, whoever that was, free up the Canadians. However, what I've understood over the past few years of doing this work, that it's never quite as simple as that. And so we are always going to take an approach whose purpose is not only to meet our needs at home, political needs at home, but that will also give the best chances of success for those Canadians in those difficult circumstances. So first and foremost, our concern is what can we do, what must we do to help Canadians in those circumstances. In the past, you have had good things to say about China and about the Chinese government. Now, are you disappointed now? Have you changed your mind? I've always been very clear about China in my mind. Yes, we always have to seek ways to improve economic growth, to develop trade ties that will benefit our Canadian economy, because this is the second biggest economy in the world, and it continues to grow. However, at the same time, we also have to pay close attention to the fact that they don't follow the same rules we do. The human rights situation is not as front of mind as it is. There are rules and standards that are Canadian, and we need to make sure that those are respected when we engage with them. And I always keep those two things in mind. That allows me to have good, frank conversations with the various leaders, the Prime Minister, and we will continue to have open and frank conversations on how we can continue to maintain these positive relations based on the rule of law, and at the same time allowing economic growth for both countries.
Prime Minister, you say that this third detention is different than the earlier two. What is it that allows you to draw such a clear distinction between the first two and this one? Is it because the first two had a clear link to the Huawei detention, or is there some salient fact that we don't know?
No, I want to be very, very careful about how we characterize this. There have been early indications that it is that they are not the case, but we are still very much in the situation of collecting more information on this, and I wouldn't want to say any more than that, but we will obviously, as we understand more of the details of this case, we'll be forthcoming with Canadians so that they understand what's going on.
I have a question on the Saudi Arabia light armored vehicles. You say you're reviewing the export permits. If you can find a way to stop this and end this contract or end the exports, will you absolutely, unequivocally, 100% exercise that option? And what is the timeline for a decision on that?
Our priority in this situation, our priority since day one, has been thinking about the Canadian jobs, the workers in London and in the supply chains that have fed into this this contract. We know that there are a lot of hardworking families in London who rely on these jobs, and we're going to keep those jobs in mind. At the same time, as I've indicated, we are bound to a contract that is a difficult contract. The part of the conditions that the previous government signed in this contract included a confidentiality clause that binds our hands from even being able to talk about what's in that contract or the nature of the penalties on that contract. But suffice it to say, we are focused on how to make sure that the workers continue to do the excellent work they're capable of doing in a situation where increasingly Canadians have questions about whether or not we should be engaging and dealing with Saudi Arabia at all. This is a complex situation. It's one that we have been engaged with since coming into office. I've been taking questions on this in the House of Commons from the very beginning, and we're going to continue to reflect on the best path forward for Canada and for Canadians.
We just hit the 10 minutes mark, so let's just one question, please, guys. Globe and Mail.
Prime Minister, I want to ask you about Huawei and your decision on whether it will be allowed to participate in our 5G infrastructure. You have arguably a growing isolation of Huawei among Western countries. 3 of our largest military allies have barred the company from participating in its 5G infrastructure. And yet you have Huawei's chair, Ken Hu, yesterday saying that the West is scapegoating him and that challenging them to produce evidence that they are in fact a security risk. So the telecommunications companies in Canada appear to be very anxious for direction on this because it's going to affect billions of dollars of spending. How soon are you from a decision, and what's keeping you?
I think you highlight both sides of the challenge significantly. There are millions of dollars, billions of dollars at stake in technology and in communications infrastructure. There is also the extraordinary imperative that Canadians and people around the world expect to be kept safe and free from interference and cyber attacks. These are the things that we are very much weighing in on, and I think you highlight why it shouldn't at all be a political decision made on how we engage, but a decision made by experts, a decision based on recommendations by our intelligence and security agencies who have an extraordinary depth of expertise, who work regularly with our Five Eyes partners, which include countries that have made the decision to ban Huawei, but also countries like the UK that haven't made that decision. And how we move forward in a thoughtful way that both protects Canadians and allows us to participate in the innovations that are moving towards the future is an extremely important decision that we will make and take with all responsibility and thoughtfulness.
Now, you've made a distinction between the third case in China of detained and the other two. Are we to conclude then that you're making a distinction between one consular case, the recent one that you talked about, and the other two that are more political? The preliminary indications that we have indicate that it is a case surrounding more routine details. The others arrested at the start of the week were accused of serious crimes, problems regarding national security, intelligence. So those cases are more serious. We're currently looking at them. The third case doesn't appear at this point, and of course we've only got the preliminary indications, are that it's not linked to a matter of national security for the Chinese. Question inaudible. Answer. The two situations are very different. The allegations of national security problems, even objectively, is very different from a routine case or a problem with a visa or something of that nature.
Obviously, we kind of talked about it, been told to de-escalate the situation with China. For the folks at home, can you explain to them why de-escalating the situation will help get these two Canadians back home? Because we saw that the case of Kevin Garrett lasted years and years and years. Why is de-escalation the right approach?
I think, as I've said, over the past 3 years, we have understood that engaging in a range of different ways on different consular cases is a better way than trying to apply a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach. And in many cases, escalation or very strong political statements can actually end up being counterproductive to the goal, which is to get Canadians freed, to get Canadians back home to safety. I think Canadians understand that even though political posturing might be satisfactory in the short term to make yourself, feel like you're stomping on the table and doing something significant, it may not directly contribute to the outcome we all want, which is for these Canadians to come home safely. And sometimes escalation is not the right political path or right substantive path to getting Canadians out of difficult situations that they find themselves in. As I've said, our approach on this is always predicated on what is the path likeliest to provide the best outcome being safe Canadians and Canadians who return home.
Bloomberg.
President Trump has threatened to give notice on exit of NAFTA to speed passage of the New Deal, whatever we're calling it. But can you say whether you've spoken to him about that and what impact the U.S. withdrawal notice on NAFTA would have on Canada?
Canada is going to pursue its ratification process as each country will. We're very much engaged with our own process, working with stakeholders and different political parties as we look at a ratification process for the new NAFTA. The Americans will follow their own process. The president is certainly going to take his own counsel on how he chooses to move forward on this. But we also know that there are a broad number of American stakeholders, members of Congress, governors who are very interested in securing trade between Canada and the United States in positive ways. And we will certainly be alongside them to demonstrate, as we have from the very beginning, that millions of good jobs on both sides of the borders have been created and are sustained by the smooth flow of goods and services across our borders when we have free trade.
TFO.
Prime Minister Trudeau, we've seen in New Brunswick and Ontario, people are talking about linguistic rights. Are you concerned when you look at what happened again yesterday with Mr. Hayes? There is nothing of the sort at the federal level when it comes to defending linguistic minorities across the country. I was very happy to have an opportunity to sit down with the various parliamentary leaders and political parties, the party leaders, to agree that defending official languages minorities is a priority for us all. Clearly, the provincial governments have their areas of jurisdiction, make their own decisions, but as we have seen, local people can be very convincing in their reactions, and alongside the federal government and a federal parliament that will always be there to do what it can to defend minority rights across the country, well, that's part of my values and my priorities.
Prime Minister, you mentioned the $40 billion natural gas pipeline in British Columbia. All 5 hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en Nation have held feasts in their feast halls and opposed that pipeline. That's the same as making a decision in the House of Commons, the Canadian legislature. Amid the ongoing talk of reconciliation, the promises of reconciliation, how do you reconcile that, the government's support for that pipeline, despite the fact that there's no support from the hereditary chiefs of that nation?
I think the LNG Canada project was a model of working with Indigenous communities, working with environmentalists, working with local communities in terms of moving forward in a way that is positive for the communities involved and positive for our entire country. We know that the export of Canadian liquid natural gas is going to displace significant amounts of coal in Asia, which will be better for the environment here at home and all around the world. So this is a good project, and the way they engaged with Indigenous leadership, with Indigenous communities, is actually a model of how we need to go forward. And it doesn't mean that before a project can go forward, we expect unanimity. I don't think that's a realistic expectation in a country like Canada, or even within any Indigenous community. But having a process of engagement, of consultation, of partnership, whereby there is a consensus or there is a clear amount of support that comes forward is an important thing, is certainly desirable. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People clearly states that engaged attempts and partnership to get to consent, informed decision-making, partnerships, accommodation of concerns that people are facing, and listening and understanding those concerns is an essential part of getting big projects built, and that's certainly a model that we look to applying right across the country.
Dernière question, Canadian Press.
One last question, Canadian Press.
You have François Legault coming out and talking about dirty energy, and meantime in Calgary at a pro-pipeline rally, politicians were booed for speaking French and talking about products from Quebec. What is the state of national unity amidst the pipeline debate? Is there anything at stake here?
I had the opportunity to talk with a lot of Canadians right across the country, and I can tell you there are not many Canadians out there who wish ill on other Canadians, regardless of which part of the country they're from. Whether it's Albertans or Quebecers or anyone in any part of the country, Canadians know that being there for each other, supporting each other in difficult times, and working towards a better future altogether is one of the most successful ways of this country to move forward and to continue to be the extraordinary, free and fair country that we are. Unfortunately, we are at a time where there are politics of division, of difference that get highlighted, but my commitment to Canadians is always to strive to bring people together, to bridge differences, to make sure that all Canadians know that from coast to coast to coast, there are people there who have their back, who are ready to support them through difficult times. That is the pledge that I continue to make to Canadians when I see them across the country, when I stand before them as Prime Minister, and I will continue to stay committed to that.
Est-ce que vous avez le temps pour plein d'autres questions?
Malheureusement.
Do you have time for more questions? No. Thank you all.
Pardon?
You didn't answer to what you would be responded to New Brunswick, and we will always defend Francophones outside Quebec. The federal government will be there as a partner for minority language communities. That's what I've always said.
Joyeux Noël tout le monde.